Hello and good morning. Welcome to the Space Madness podcast, where we talk about interesting personal stories of space exploration. And as usual, I have a cheesy introduction about why it's called Space Madness, mostly because when this kind of work appeals to you, it's kind of unavoidable and you fall in love with it and you couldn't do something else if you tried. So it can be maddening in that way, as we've talked about, I think 10 previous times here. This is episode number 11. So today I have with me Elsbeth Magilton of the University of Nebraska, and she has a really interesting story and journey through education and space law and policy. And it connects directly to me because I went to this program in the space law program in 2008, 2009. I was in the first group. And that was a really almost a bizarre experience because at the time no one had ever heard of space law that I knew. Even fewer people had ever really put any thought into the state of Nebraska, where I came from and where I had lived on the coast. And that was an unfair coastal perception, having flown over Nebraska many times. And so I genuinely am really grateful, not just for the program, what it did for my career, in that it helped me get where I wanted to go, but it also really introduced me to part of the country that I had overlooked. And that is just, I have to acknowledge that. And I think the country's a little more connected now, particularly with social media. It's easier for young people to see experiences in other states. But I guess I'm old enough where I could just ignore the state of Nebraska until I saw in 2008 that it was starting a space law program. And so with that, I think I'll hand it over to you if you could give us a brief intro and tell us what you do.
Sure, absolutely. I am a resident lecturer and I direct our externship, or basically our experiential learning program here at the College of Law. But from 2012 to 2024, I was the executive director of the Space, Cyber, and National Security Law program, formerly Space, Cyber, and Telecommunications Law program here at Nebraska. I continue to teach our U.S. space policy course, so I'm still a part of that program as a professor, even though I'm no longer its executive director. But I still have a lot of legacy with our alums and our program, and spend a lot of time with students in the space sector thinking about space law. I think we actually had to have crossed paths when you were here as an LL.M in the program. I was a 1L, and for people who are maybe not in the law world, that's a first-year law student in Nebraska in 2008-9. I graduated in 2011. And was only left the university world for about 6 months, 10 months before I came back as the executive director, which at the time was still a part-time role. It was a really small but growing program. Like you said, it does not have the notoriety that space law and even at the time cyber has now. And so a big part of my role was figuring out how to grow it, which had the wonderful side effect of growing my job. And so after about 2 or 3 years, then I was full-time, really had to grow my own program to grow my own role, which was something that was incredibly scary as like a 26, 27-year-old, but also I think a really cool professional experience. And so that's really what my beginnings and the program looked like.
Yeah, I you and I have crossed paths in person a half dozen times over the years. I think most recently in DC when I still lived there. But it hadn't occurred to me that yes, I'm sure we crossed paths without knowing it in '08 in Nebraska, particularly as in my memory in the winter when you would avoid going outside, so you'd run into a lot of people on the inside.
I'm from Nebraska, so
yeah,
I'm not as bothered by it, perhaps.
And having lived in Wisconsin for 2 years,
I think compared to Wisconsin.
Well, it never got to -40, which it did one week when I was in Nebraska. I think the coldest we had in Wisconsin was -26, and that was memorable. So yeah. So you said you left the executive director program last year.
Yes.
So okay, so the majority of your career was running that program. So I'm curious. So you decide. Well, I'm curious how you ended up deciding to go to law school in the first place.
Yeah.
That itself being a major life decision, let alone later committing to space law. There is one space law story I have to tell, which I think I told a few weeks ago, which is that in 2008, when I was looking at the program, Fox had a TV show called Jobs You Won't Believe Exist. And I'm not making it up, but Space Lawyer was number 16 or something. And so I got to point people to that every time someone said, hey, what are you doing? Oh, I'm going to Nebraska. Why? Space law. Like in that show, yeah. So here we are. It's a little bit less obscure now, but
Yeah.
But back to you. How did law school itself, end up on your radar?
Yeah, so I never had any inclination to be a lawyer ever as a child and through high school. I liked procedure and I liked rules and I liked
Hmm.
organizing things. And I say that in the sense that I was a stage manager and an artist who was particularly interested in like how things fit together. And I am the daughter of artists. And so when I went to college, I started as a fine art major. And through that program and twists and turns and a couple of different schools and then landed back where I started, right? As we all do when we're 17, 18, 19. I started taking some graphic design courses, and through that, there was some web development. And I had always viewed myself as an artist as not a STEM person, right? Like, I am just inherently bad at math. And it is true, trig did not go well for me. But I had this, like, bias that there was just no way I could be good at something that had to do with technology. And even though so I grew up in this family of creatives, but my father, his trade, he was an electrical engineer. And my parents love science fiction. So even though I saw myself as this artist, I was raised on Star Trek. I was raised on Asimov. I was raised on all of these things. And so when I started taking these graphic design and web development and website design courses in college, I was like, I love this and I'm pretty good at it, right? I could learn those languages pretty well. I understood how things fit together. It actually reminded me a lot of stage management, putting together things, which was you have all of these different components that you need, and we're going to put it together in a really interesting way and run the show, right? Everything has to work together to create a cohesive performance and experience for the user or for the audience.
See, now I don't want to interrupt you for long, but see, I wish we had known each other when we were there in Nebraska because so my wife also did theater before medicine. And so that would have been a really interesting conversation and still would to hear the different perceptions on the applicability of stage management to these other fields that
Right.
at least to first order are not obviously connected. But,
I still use
I
improv in my
digress.
law classrooms, right?
Okay.
I still am a theater nerd at heart, right?
Okay. Love it.
Always a theater dork. So anyway, I ended up graduating and deciding I want to do web development. This is what this is the world I want to work in. And so my first job out of undergrad was actually with the Supreme Court here in the state of Nebraska, and they had a particular project called the Through the Eyes of the Child initiative. And at the time, this is kind of legal speak, but we needed more guardian ad litems or attorneys who represent the interests of a child in a court proceeding when there is a potential separation with their parents, or any sort of child protection case that goes through the court system. And if you're familiar at all with Nebraska, which I know most people aren't, we're one of those states where all the population lives in the same like 200-mile radius in the southeastern corner of the state. And then
You're not leaving out Eagle, Nebraska, are you?
that
There's
would
at
be
least
in that 200-mile radius.
Oh, it is? Really? Oh, okay. There's at least 20 people there. That was where one of our last stops before we left going west
Right?
at what was it? The Big Game Diner? Anyway,
Yeah.
shout out to Eagle,
Thinking
Nebraska.
of Paxton or Cozad if you're going to Ole's.
Oh, yes. I am. Ollie's, yes. Okay. I biked to Eagle, Nebraska once.
I would say Eagle's right around
Right,
here. Yeah.
right. But you're right. I was thinking of Paxton.
You're further out. I
Okay.
mean, that's at least still on the interstate, right?
Yes.
So we actually have a decent amount of population. You get off that interstate into the northwestern part of Nebraska, there's not a ton of people.
Yeah.
And certainly there were some lawyers, not enough lawyers. We have some, real rural need, but particularly not lawyers that were serving as guardian ad litems. And so part of the
see.
work I was doing with this initiative with the Nebraska Supreme Court was creating training programs for attorneys that lived out in different parts of Nebraska. And so part of my job was designing the platform and then planning all of these trainings and then traveling with all of these lawyers
Wow.
for the first 2 years of this initiative to kind of deploy the training. And so I spent a lot of time in state of Nebraska rental cars with attorneys.
Okay.
The way that they thought about the world and approached problems interested me. I also realized that perhaps I liked sitting with computers alone as an extrovert less than I imagined I would.
Okay. Sure.
I needed something that I felt was a bit more active and use different skill sets that I had. And so like I said, I enjoyed working with all these lawyers so much and all these judges as we traveled around the state of Nebraska. And I thought, gosh, I think I could go to law school. And I know I want to stay in tech. I don't know that I want to veer off into family law, which is what they, of course, all practiced. But I like the way that lawyers think about the world. And so I was telling my then fiance, boyfriend, I don't remember exactly where we were at, and I really distinctly remember we were like in the pool at our apartment complex having a couple of beers. And I was like, I could do this. And he's like, I think you could do this. And I was like, maybe I should do this. And he was like, maybe you
Yeah.
should do this. And then the sweet man went out the next day and bought me an LSAT study guide at Barnes and
Oh,
Noble, where I was a seasonal employee.
I remember my LSAT study guide. Yeah.
And, this was like in August, and I took it in October, and then I applied and
Okay.
got early admission. So, I mean, I made
Wow.
the decision really almost irresponsibly quickly.
Mm.
And I had been considering an MFA, and I remember telling both my parents, and they were, of course, happy for me and pleased, but I probably have the only parents on the planet who were like, are you sure you don't want the Master in Fine Arts?
Wow.
But I went to law school.
I love that. And you have it's such an uncommon story to have that exposure to the legal profession because usually it's heartless and cold as opposed to, or it's often heartless and cold as opposed to so warm and child focused and caring focused. And
I mean, it was still
I'm not
brutal subject matter.
fair,
Yeah,
but
you don't need a guardian ad litem because things have gone well in your
true,
family structure.
true.
But yes, you're right. These were lawyers who were deeply passionate about what they were doing. They certainly weren't doing it for the money. They were doing it because they wanted to help people, which was meaningful to me. Like I said, though, I knew that I wanted my path to continue to center on my newfound love of computers and technology.
Mhm.
Something that I felt, through high school and my elementary and middle school experiences. Like I said, I thought STEM was so not for me. And then in college, everything opened up in a different way. And I thought, gosh, I have to continue to tap into that. And so I really focused, particularly on cyber, actually, not space at all when I first started
Okay.
school. Incredibly cyber focused.
Well, I'm curious to kind of go on another tangent about as an educator now and reflecting on your education. You've said twice now how you really didn't feel like STEM was for you, and I'm curious, was that, what are your thoughts on how you received that message as a child, or was that something that the education system could have done better for you, or was that independent of it? Just out of curiosity as a
I think
huge
it's
nerd myself.
combination of all of those things, right?
Okay.
I mean, I am a product of the 80s and 90s, which we were still hearing the message, I think, from teachers that boys are better at math and girls are better at words, which we know is garbage. But that was still a messaging that felt really common.
Yeah.
None of the women I knew had careers that had anything to do with math, science,
Okay.
technology. And so it wasn't that I was like actively thinking to myself, women can't do this.
Sure.
But it was just like that was the messaging.
Sure.
And then, like I said, honestly, my math classes didn't go well. I was
Yeah.
bad at it
Yeah.
and had to work really hard to keep my GPA where it needed to be when I got into middle school and high school. I had this is wildly embarrassing to mention, but I think it's fair, and I have told students this story before. When I was in high school, my junior year, I had to be in remedial algebra 2. Every other class I was in was AP. So I was in the repeat algebra, which was already, by the way, for juniors behind, right? You should be beyond algebra 2 when you're a junior in high school. And I was even in remedial algebra 2. Meanwhile, I was in college level courses for
Sure.
almost everything else I was taking. And so there was this real like, yeah, clearly you're not meant for that world. Just focus on words.
I don't want to make this about me, but I have a similar story in that, I mean, I am a 3-time NASA Innovative Advanced Concept Fellow, having designed and led design teams for space missions. I couldn't do multivariable calculus, period. And in fact, on my first proposal on this subject, I wrote to NASA, look, I don't have a traditional engineering and science background, but my team does.
Right.
And my manager at the time encouraged me despite that lack, and it was received well. And over the years at JPL and NASA, I really watched with awe as people with that intuitive language level understanding of math, where it's not a tool, it's a language for them. And it still amazes me to this day. I'm a little better now, but it amazes me to this day. It is truly a language that I think, going all the way back to early childhood education, I think there's growing awareness now that there's different ways to teach it that set people up better. But back to you.
No, absolutely. And I do think, upon reflection, that some of it has to do with some unfortunate teachers. I had some teachers at kind of formative points in math curriculum that only taught for 1 year. Or the people who were just maybe not meant in those roles, who I'm sure were lovely people, but
Sure.
were not meant to be teaching math in the way that I was learning it anyway. So I also just think there was just truly some bad luck.
Sure.
And so I was really fortunate when I got to college, and in addition to my computer classes, also had a math instructor that was basically, I think, can't remember the name of the class. It was like problem solving or logical games or something like that. And basically it was the get the math credit for the people who are really terrible at math.
Yeah.
And she was one of the best teachers I've ever had. And I started to realize that I liked some of this stuff. And I saw these logic games in the same way that I saw coding.
Okay.
I'll tell you now,
Sure.
logic games was the best section on my LSAT, which is the admission exam in law school. And I started to be like, oh, wait, just because I struggled with some of these concepts in traditional math classrooms doesn't mean that my brain can't think about things in other ways.
Sure.
And that was really affirming. Now, did I go back and try calc? No, because it wasn't really necessary, frankly, for the types of work I was interested in doing. But I definitely have a different relationship to math now. And I know one thing you know about me is that I, for several years, was the president of Girls Code Lincoln, which is our chapter of Girls Code, thinking about making sure that young women can see themselves in these spaces and know that whether or not they choose to pursue coding, I could care less. I just want them to know that it's open to them and that there are rooms they should feel comfortable in. And so that has been a big driver of mine based on my own experiences and thinking about what I was limited to.
Sure.
I really wasn't limited to.
Sure. A couple things that this brings to my mind. I had an evidence professor who was so miserable about having had to teach evidence that very quickly people just stopped showing up. And I honestly should have stopped showing up sooner, but I felt like I'm paying to be here. But I ultimately only came to my whatever level of understanding about the evidence that I had through the examples and explanations series of books.
Yeah,
that if there's any law students listening or watching, I highly recommend you check those out. Even they're actually my favorite part. They were my favorite part of my Lou education because they had the history and the stories and the practical stuff. So shout out for examples and explanations. I did not think this morning when I woke up that I'd be shouting out that book series, but I'm glad I did. To your other point, my daughter asked me today, because when I picked her up at camp, the counselor said to her, "Oh, your mom's here," and so she asked me, why did the counselor say that your mom was here? And I kind of went into an age-appropriate explanation of the kind of assumptions that are made about male primary parents and how most people, it usually is still the mom, even if there's a growing number of fathers doing this kind of stuff. But it really kind of got me thinking about this gender expectations and assumptions in education, and how unfortunately for thousands of years you only had half the population working on these problems, the major problems and questions. And so that was why I wanted to kind of go a little further into that subject. And I think that representation in aerospace has changed significantly.
I think so too.
Which is great. So again, more minds on the problems is a good thing. They're really hard problems.
More progress to make, but we've made excellent progress.
Right. Yeah. So I'm starting to come up with a guess of how coming back to the running the program appealed to you after you graduated. I'm curious about that 6 months. What
It has nothing to do.
What's that?
Since you're going to be disappointed, I had a baby, which is not disappointing to me, but it's maybe less of a thrilling tale. I was pregnant when I graduated from law school. And to be totally frank, it's really hard to find a job when you're pregnant, and whether people are consciously doing that or not. And additionally, in 2011, the legal field was still bouncing back from a really big recession. And so there was just a lot of things working against me. So it wasn't just the pregnancy. It was also, it's always hard to find that first job out of law school, particularly if I did not want to go the law firm route. I knew that wasn't a fit for me.
Yeah.
And then I had a baby, and I also had a baby prematurely. And I also did not pass the bar exam the first time I took it. So not because I was pregnant, you could certainly be successful and pregnant at the same time, but I had a lot going on. I was graduating, I didn't have insurance, I had this baby. There was a lot happening. And so there was just a lot of factors my life felt like it was falling apart. Like I had done everything right. I was married to my boyfriend, fiance by that point. Yeah. But, his father had just passed away, and so he was across the country in Philadelphia for his father's funeral when our son was born prematurely.
Wow.
And it was the same week I found out I didn't pass the bar, and I was still searching for a job. So basically, it was just like my life imploded, in the 4 months after I graduated from law school. And I'll be totally frank. As I was searching for jobs, I still was very cyber interested. I had clerked for the Department of Insurance during law school and
Uh,
right around the time of the Affordable Care Act. And so it was an interesting time. And I knew I liked administrative law. I knew I liked
uh,
regulatory work, government, statutory. Like that was the world that I felt the best in. And so I was looking for
mm,
jobs in that realm but also played into the cyber piece, which made sense for insurance in terms of data privacy and some of those other.
mm.
And this job came up at the university, and I talked to, a person we both know, Matt Schaefer, who was our founding faculty director for the program. And, this job was posted as part-time. And I was,
Yeah,
Matt, I can't do a part-time job. Like, I have this baby. I need a
yeah,
job. And he said the magic words, which are, it still has health insurance. And I said, I will be there Monday.
yeah.
And of course, I still had to interview for it and go through
Sure,
all of
sure.
the processes. It's not like he said that and I was able to show up, but
Right.
I still had to earn it and
Sure,
show that I could
sure.
handle the tasks. But it persuaded me to take a part-time academic job. Working in academics was not the plan either, right? I was looking for cyber and business and transactional or government-focused work. But here I landed. And over the next couple of years, it became clear that while we, of course, were doing all of the cyber work, which was of interest to me given my background, we also needed somebody who could go out and talk about space. Because like you said, people had not heard about it at that point. And so much of my job was to grow the profile of the program, which meant that I was the one out there kind of doing the dog and pony show, right?
Sure.
Going to all the conferences, going to every event, getting in front of people of the other practice areas. And so I needed to learn space law.
I think that's where we first met, was one of the conferences in DC. Oh, I'm picturing it. I want to say it was at some journalism club or some.
Yeah, that we used to always host at the National Press Club.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's where it was. And it was 2014 or something like that, or 15. And I had just moved to DC and had to figure out what the heck I was doing. And so I said, yes, I will come to that meeting and every meeting and everything I could possibly show up at, just to find,
Yeah,
figure out my next moves. Okay, so that's where we first met in person.
right.
We have been in touch via email because you took over as the director and I was getting emails from the program via you. Okay,
Yes.
cool.
And during that time, we also ended up with the whole University of Nebraska system ended up with a UARC, or a University Affiliated Research Center, which is a contractual relationship between an educational institution and an combatant command. And so our relationship was with U.S. Strategic Command, which makes sense here in Nebraska, although physical proximity is not a requirement of a UARC. And at the time, Stratcom still had that space and that cyber mission set, which also answers the question of why is this program in Nebraska, which is
Yes.
the question that we get most often, like, why there? Well, that's why.
Yeah.
The core part of our LL.M program also remains training JAG officers. We train civilians, of course, but also with our JAG officers has been just a key component of the program since its beginning and is now our primary student base, at least for the LL.M. The majority of
Sure.
our JD students are civilian. But that UARC was also something that I spent a huge portion of my career cultivating as
Okay.
we figured out, the funded research model is a model that has been tried and true and common across the sciences in most academic institutions. It is not really a law school model, right? There's not a lot of law
Right,
schools
yeah.
depending significantly on funded research, which in today's environment is maybe a good thing.
Sure.
But for a good portion of my 12-ish years leading that program, I really focused on funded research opportunities. And working through some of those, then often also being the person who performed the research, which I always really enjoyed as well.
Yeah, that model is now increasingly on the radar of NASA centers, looking for some semblance of stability in the policy environment.
Yeah.
I'll leave it at that. So this idea. So this reminds me of this week's episode with Duncan Blake of the
I love Duncan.
of the Royal. What's that?
I've been a guest in one of his classes before, and
Okay.
he's done guest stuff for us and
Oh,
worked
cool.
with so many people on our team. He's
Okay.
a really fantastic guy.
Yeah, and of the Australian Air Force, and it's funny he mentioned that he almost went to the program in 2008,
Oh yeah.
but his family was not as receptive as going to Nebraska. But anyway, so we're talking about the Woomer manual and the process of developing these global quasi agreements about different sorts of activity that large amounts of humanity ought to have some input into. And I don't know if there's a UARC connection to projects like that, but a question occurs to me: is that a mechanism by which an institution could take a leading role in developing something like that, or am I just speculating far off base here?
Yeah, so our UARC was not part of the Woomera
Uh,
project. That was fully university led by the partner organizations that
okay.
participated in it, which of course the
Mm,
University of Nebraska was one of the key ones. That's
mm,
not to say that our military partners aren't excited and interested in that project or projects like
mm,
it. So what a UARC helps you do is basically bypass competitive bidding. And so you can
mm.
just have a direct contractual relationship, but you still have to find the pieces that make sense. And
Sure.
while our relationship was with Stratcom, we can still contract across the department with any groups. And so even as their mission sets moved and we saw, the reinstated Space Command, Cyber
Mm,
Command's creation, we can still work with those. And a lot of what we actually focused on for a number of years was operational law trainings. And so we would
mm,
provide continued legal education for JAGs that is specific and classified to operational law and international law
mm.
to help support people as they were moving from, a base legal position into an ops law position into whatever they might be to next. And so providing
Okay.
additional training with using our faculty and expertise.
Can you tell me more about operations law? Because I don't know what it is, and I doubt the listeners will.
Right. So operational law is when you're looking at applying laws of armed conflict and international
Mm,
law to operational mission objectives. And so
okay.
thinking about the legality of mission objectives and mission planning.
Okay, so like target selection and stuff. Got it. Okay. That I was thinking it might be that, but I wasn't sure. Okay.
Sure.
So yeah, so one thing that after talking with Duncan about the Woomera project, I started to look at these drone swarm tactics that we're seeing in the world now in a different light. I wonder if there's a similar set of principles for that, where a $500 toy can destroy $1 billion aircraft. Being the novice I am, I can only assume that people are thinking about this, but it does seem like something that might rise to the level of institutions around the world wanting some kind of global agreement or at least discussion.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're in a difficult period of time. I,
Mm,
I don't want to wade too far out of my own specialty, which is really U.S. centric, um, but I don't. Most people, I think, agree that we're not seeing the likelihood of another multilateral agreement on the table, and
mm,
haven't for
mm,
the last 5 to 10 years in this political environment. And so, the idea that we'll be able to solve some of the insecurity we're feeling
mm.
through that mechanism, I am not terribly optimistic of, to be totally
Got
frank.
it. Okay.
I think the only thing that we're seeing success with is some bilateral agreements. You can, I guess, maybe point to Artemis, which seemingly
Mm,
has been somewhat abandoned by the administration and
yeah.
really wasn't a security focused agreement in the first place, right? It had
Right.
some stuff in there with the safety zones and other pieces. I'm happy to talk about Artemis more if that's useful. But I don't see Artemis as an indication that there is a global appetite for new multilateral agreements that would restrain space activities. Would I love to
Sure.
see some new global agreements that restrained space
Yeah.
activity? Absolutely. Do I think that it's practical or possible currently? I really don't.
So
That's my perception.
I would actually like to talk about Artemis more because as we discussed this, it occurs to me my view of it comes from the NASA mission side, despite my space law background. And it always seemed to me so a lot of NASA stuff happened while I was working for NASA that everyone around me read it very differently than me because it was to them it was like a Kennedy Apollo speech.
Mm,
And from my background, I know, that's just words, actually. That has no impact. There's no
right.
budget. There's no plan. There's no commitment. And so I always kind of looked
Public
at
support.
that.
Yeah, that's all that's happening.
What's that?
To me, that's a call for public support, but
Right.
that's not actual policy. That's not actual action.
Right. And so sometimes kind of mixing up what hat I was wearing, I would see people within NASA respond to that messaging as if it was, I
Right.
can only assume right after Kennedy gave that speech, a bunch of contracts were signed with prime contractors. The speech itself meant nothing other than, some good feelings. But it was then commitments to industry that actually started Apollo, right? And so I think as I was wearing the mission hat at NASA, I forgot kind of to think through the policy hat. So I'm curious, for people who might be not exposed to space law at all, who might be listening, who might be more from the mission side or the science side, what did the Artemis Accords actually mean / accomplish?
Yeah.
And how does that fit into the wider world?
So when I teach the Artemis Accords, um, describe them as incredibly clever. I think it's a really interesting instrument and global tactic, right? Like we said, there's really not appetite for a new multilateral agreement. And so what does this collaboration between NASA and the State Department do? Well, it's going to all of these places individually for a series of bilateral agreements, which are much easier to do. In many of those instances, it's almost treated like a press moment. But if you look at what's in the Accords, it is not just mirroring the Outer Space Treaty, it's also expanding upon a lot of those principles from the U.S. perspective, which of course is useful to us, as us being the capital us, right? Not me personally, but the U.S. As we expand and think about these principles from the Outer Space Treaty in a way that favors our interpretation of them. And so you start to create what is almost like this de facto larger scale agreement through these series of bilateral agreements, which I think there was a lot more global appetite to. Plus, you have the carrot here, right? You want to participate in our Artemis mission. You want to have any science that goes up on there. You want to sell any component parts. You need to be a part of the Artemis Accords as a legal instrument as well.
Okay.
There's plenty of international lawyers who are going to tell you soft law is a waste of time. Those arguments are tried and true, and I've heard them a lot. I think in our current global environment, and maybe I'm too much of a political scientist, I do a lot of work with political scientists, I couldn't disagree more. I think it's actually really helpful and important right now when we're not going to get to a place of binding law.
So if I'm an Italian...
law is disregarded. And so I think there's a lot of usefulness to soft law.
So if I'm an Italian manufacturer of components, it seems like the Artemis Accord would be something I would want to get Italian government support for to maintain and expand that market for me. Is that just from one perspective on these agreements, is that like an industry, is it like a carrot for industry globally to pressure their governments to participate, or is it more from the other way around, that governments would agree in order to bring more to their countries, or both?
I think it's probably flowing more through the latter from what you described, right? Like, are small component companies in Italy selling component parts to NASA? Maybe. That's out of my wheelhouse, right? Yes,
they are.
Right? And we know that if they wanted to be part of Artemis mission, they needed to have signed the Accords as a state. So yes, it's probably flowing that direction. I also think there is something to be said for still being the largest global space power. And who doesn't want to sit at the table with the kids in the lunchroom who have the most power?
Right. Right.
And so there is also, I just think, a global pressure to, especially in some non-binding soft law way, be affiliated with U.S. perspective and be affiliated with U.S. mission. We're already seeing states, though, who have also decided to go in with the Russian and Chinese lunar program, right? And there's nothing that prohibits them from signing both and being a part of styles of agreements. And so, people are taking their chances and figuring out what's gonna fit. And who knows?
Interesting.
Obviously, after the last 6 months, that might have been wise. Who knows what's going on with the Artemis program now? And who knows where that'll end up. And so, the other thing that I think is particularly interesting about the Accords is that, a lot of people don't see NASA as a diplomatic entity. And certainly it's not a rulemaking entity. But they do have that charge. I mean, if you go back to the 90s, the congressional authorization, and it remains in there today, is this international collaboration and cooperation. And we see that through the legal work that they do. And we have great examples of it. Artemis is just one more of continuing that legal collaboration. And I think the State Department really kind of put NASA out in front of the Artemis Accords quite a bit. I think that makes a lot of sense, right? Like, I will challenge my students to say, when is the last time you walked into Target and saw a U.S. Department of Agriculture hoodie? They're like, well, never. I'm like, when's the last time you walked in and saw the blue NASA meatball? And
it's funny you should mention that.
Yeah.
Because I want to actually go back into I want to talk a little bit more about the authority of NASA to actually do things internationally. But since you mentioned the hoodies, and I want to acknowledge our co-host Wednesday who's joined the chat. Once the young people were starting to wear all that NASA stuff again, I got really curious, and I'm vaguely aware that, like, for a while at least, it was actually a fashion trend to wear NASA tagged
it's
stuff.
Trendy now, I am told by my undergrads. I also teach several undergrad seminars.
I see.
Less popular.
And to my disappointment, it was not an indication of a person's actual interest in the subject matter, as I learned the hard way. But I guess I'm still happy people are looking at it. Better than nothing. So, but I'm curious. When you mentioned the when you mentioned the NASA Authorization Act in the 50s, my instinct was no, that did not give NASA any international authority, but obviously that was wrong. So I'm curious what you
Necessarily to go speak on behalf of the United States internationally, but they are charged with exploring and considering and collaborating internationally in order to achieve the mission objectives. So there is permission baked into that for these types of international collaborations, right? You see that, I think most famously with the International Space Station, but we can see that now through this too, right? And there is an international law component in the NASA legal offices who are doing this work and thinking about this work, and they, of course, are doing many other things as well. But no, absolutely, baked into how Congress imagined NASA, this charge of collaborating internationally to meet all of their other objectives, space exploration, terrestrial science and everything else. Yeah.
I suppose that I should have thought of my own experience attending the UN COPIOS meeting and Committee on Peaceful Uses of Outer Space. As part of that, as I recall, it was just NASA people. There were no State Department people. And so I guess I have my own experience that I should have thought of that. But that was one of the most interesting experiences, as I was still very junior and I was still trying to figure out a lot of things. But to attend that meeting during the week of the Arab Spring, actually, was really interesting. And I'll never forget there was a Middle Eastern nation group that was late because of the Arab Spring, and they walked in on the second or third day after I had shorted out my NASA laptop's charger using the wrong adapter, and they walked in with this dramatic entrance, apologizing profusely for being late, and they handed to every single person a small wooden box of dates from Saudi Arabia.
Right. That's pretty
And I should have kept the box. But yeah, so I can imagine that the existence of the authority and the exercise of it kind of waxes and wanes with presidential administrations and general approaches to kind of agency decision making and so on. Like for example, right now I doubt that NASA is sort of between the lines kind of encouraged to do kind of messaging on behalf of the U.S. on its own.
I mean, we're outside my purview, and I think that messaging is always going to be in collaboration with other agencies of the United States. I don't think that they have the authority to just go rogue and say what they want.
Yeah.
So I don't want to get in trouble with any of my lawyer friends at NASA, to be clear here.
Fair enough.
But I do think it is part of their mission, right? Is to collaborate internationally, and I think much of the effort of the Accords is in align with that. I think the Accords were really, really, really interesting. I hope that we see a renewed interest in Artemis. I am not entirely optimistic, if I'm being frank, in terms of what this administration is most interested in, despite Artemis being the brainchild of the first iteration of this administration.
Yeah.
But we see a lot of the activities that were so active in space during Trump 1.0 not necessarily being returned to the same vigor in Trump 2.0. So it's really hard to predict.
Yeah, I think the only consistent thing is the low priority of appointing a NASA administrator, which would still be a useful thing to have.
Right. Maybe Jim will
some
come
point.
back. No, I doubt it.
I actually spoke to him once in 2019. I was presenting a mission concept at NASA Day on the Hill, and he thought my mission was pretty cool. And he said he used these words. He said, "This should be a program of record." And I thought, okay, here's my chance. So I said, "I'll accept cash, check, and gold bullion." And he chuckled, and I said, "Who can I follow up with about that?" And he did not give me a real answer, but I tried. So
Hey,
I mean, if you're gonna BS somebody, you shouldn't use the words program of record, because that actually means something. But what can you say? I tried. So, okay, so you're teaching these subjects throughout those 12 years, across which there was a wide variety of presidential approaches to the legal system, regulatory law, and policy. Must have been a really interesting experience.
Yeah, well, to be clear, many of those years were spent research and administration and leading the program and fundraising only.
Okay.
I was certainly have not taught through every administration. That would not be accurate. But yes, I have seen space go from what you were talking about. No one knew what it was. I would go to a dinner party and they'd be like, "That's not real." So,
Yeah.
who owns the moon? And we'd have to have
Yeah.
that in conversation over and over again. To, I don't know, probably 5, 6 years ago, people being like, oh yeah, I've heard of SpaceX.
Hmm.
Oh yeah,
Hmm.
I've heard of Blue Origin. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
To now where people are like, are you okay? And so, yeah, it's run the gamut of being completely under the radar of
Hmm.
most of the population to being something that people absolutely have at least a minimal amount of awareness of, or even if they didn't have awareness, as soon as you say it, they go, oh yeah, of course we need people thinking about that.
Yeah.
Um,
And when you
so it's been
see,
interesting to see that change so rapidly.
well, when you see the Starlink satellites go by overhead,
Creepy. Yeah.
it makes it real in a way that I think is for a lot of people easy to ignore different activities in space because you can't see them. But when something that dramatic goes by and outshines literally other things in the sky that have remained the same for most of humans looking up for 10,000 years, it's a big moment. So
Mhm.
oh, okay. So you left the director position last year, and can you remind us what you're teaching now?
Yeah. So, I still very dedicated and love our program and
Mm,
still definitely a part of it here. It was just time for me to make a switch. I was also given the role of directing our externship program, our experiential
mm,
education. And I took that on because one of the things that I did as an executive director was oversee a lot of student internships, externships, and student relationships where we were
mm,
trying to get them practical experience outside of our building. And I loved that work. I
mm,
loved helping students think through their career moves, plan those moves, finding opportunities for students. We actually had,
mm,
under my time with the program, a major NASA grant that we created the Space Law Network, which created externships and internships at
mm.
all 9 NASA centers for
Oh,
students
wow.
across the United States and the legal offices, helped cement legal internships as part of the broader NASA internship program,
Mm,
something I've always really cared about. And so when the law school said, hey, we have got to restructure how we give credit for work outside the building, which is an externship, we need
mm.
somebody who's really in charge of that. And I thought, I love this work. And I know I'm going to be with students who are not doing space.
Yeah.
I just really was passionate about practical education. I felt like practical education had been fundamental to me. I
Hmm.
learn better through doing, and I see law students all the time who I think are so talented and bright, and the doctrinal legal lecture classrooms are not always successful for them. And so I want
Yeah.
to get them into offices actually practicing. And so I was passionate enough about it that I said, I want to give my pitch as to how I
Mm,
would. We had no program doing this. And so it was
hmm.
an opportunity for me to build a program from scratch and completely under my own direction. And I took it. And it's been a really cool opportunity to go from having no formalized externship program to a really robust program where I'm working with over 100 students a year in their placements year round. So that's been really, really cool. I also teach our public speaking class, which I really see as a
Oh,
direct
cool.
result of my time as the executive director.
Sure.
In 2015, one of the big goals I set for myself and for our program was to get in front of a group of people once a month for a minimum of a year. And I did it for
Mm,
5 years.
okay.
And so, sometimes it was me calling people to see if I could speak there, but it started to build on itself. And so I did a lot of public speaking at a lot of
Mm,
different events, done South by Southwest. I've done a TED. I've done,
okay.
a lot of different things. And I love public speaking. And so I love teaching public speaking for lawyers. And then, like I said, I
Ah,
teach our U.S. space issues and U.S. space policy course.
interesting.
So my teaching now in the space world and my writing and my work in there is really, really U.S. centric. And thinking about how we regulate space.
Can you tell me a little more about what you teach on the U.S. side?
Yeah. So in the law course, we're really focused on the regulatory piece, right? So we're going to start through
Hmm.
our patchwork approach to U.S. space regulation. And so we're going to talk through the FAA authorities, how that licensing
Okay.
process works. We're going to go through NOAA. We have
Mm,
wonderful alumni guest speakers who have been at some of these agencies or worked on the other side as a company receiving these
mm,
licensures. So we go pretty in depth through the licensing process and then think about a policy issue or topic that needs to be
mm,
addressed in the government right now and work on writing white papers. And so it is really legal focused. A lot of that material also shows up in the space ethics course that I'm starting to teach at our honors college to the undergraduates. We spend a lot of time on the history of NASA, history of space in the United States, any of the ethical questions that we saw through like the race riots in the 60s where we were balancing national emergencies with the budget for the moon mission.
wow.
Apollo. We kind of work through all of that history and then go through a series of like case studies of different modern issues from asteroid mining to in on-orbit habitations. And I asked the students to sort of pick a current topic or policy issue to focus on for the class. So it's fun. It's really fun.
That's really interesting, and it reminds me of a revelation that I had. I recently read this book about the Vietnam War. It was an audiobook. It took 36 hours, but I was in traffic enough that it was fine. But one of the most interesting things to me was the way it painted this picture of in the late 60s of President Johnson going from meetings about Vietnam to meetings about NASA in the same morning.
Right.
And the best of us and the worst of us at the same hour in some cases.
Right.
And just truly an inconceivable.
Truly. And Johnson famously quiet about NASA programs was really what led to his loss. And so, a lot of that too is that he played his cards really, really close to the vest during that period, which probably was wise and made sense, but also left the American people worried about falling behind and what was NASA really up to, and so then we see this explosion of real national recognition of what NASA was doing and celebration as we move through different administrations who really used NASA as almost a way to comfort the U.S. population as well as get them feeling patriotic and excited about what we could do as a nation.
See, I found that really interesting because I wonder how much Johnson's relative silence on that led to Nixon being comfortable canning the last 3 Apollo missions. And at that time, NASA was working on Saturn V's to Mars. I mean, then NASA fully expected to go to Mars next with people then.
My suspicion is that Nixon's motivation was much more based on public interest. The public had lost interest in space. We know as space people, space is hard. And so it takes a long time. And there's one thing that we know about the general population, they're going to move on quickly.
Yeah.
And so, if we're not seeing a lot of constant action, they're going to lose interest. And so my take on it, although it would be fun to, I'm armchair historian here, I'm not an historian, but my take on it is that the Nixon decisions were incredibly focused on public perception and popularity.
Yeah. I think you and I could talk about that extensively, but I want to be mindful of time here. So I'm curious, what does the next 5 years look like for you and then for the University of Nebraska and the program?
If I knew that, God, what a gift that would be. I am, there's no doubt in my mind our program will still exist in 5 years and still be important. The number of students who, in their admissions essays to the University of Nebraska mention our program grows every year.
To other parts of the university, they're still mentioning the space law program?
Oh, yes.
Oh, wow. That's awesome.
Yeah. And our JD section or our law student section, not just LL.M, continues to grow and grow. We have one of the most active clubs in the building of engaged students who are excited about these topics. And I think that having people who are interested and engaged and competent in the subject area is going to be extremely important for national security and for the protection of the space environment.
Sure.
In my personal opinion, I'm very worried about the space environment and the safety of the space environment and operating therein. And so having people who are also concerned about that, educated about that is really important. And so I see the Nebraska community continuing to play a large role in that. Because of our history and the subject matter, I recognize that, what we're a 17-year-old program, that's not that many years, but in this field, that's
wow. Yeah, that does.
Right.
It does sound like a long time ago now.
Right. In this field, and so we have that background and that group of alumni, frankly, who have that expertise that are leading that next generation into it, such as yourself. And so I'm really optimistic about the future of our program, even as it grows and changes. The state of higher ed right now is, I don't want to say scary, because I think that's maybe an overstatement, but we're less stable than we were 10 years ago in terms of knowing what to expect from the next 5. And so it'll be interesting to see how that changes, but I do believe we'll still have people here doing this work. As for what's up for me, I have that baby that I had prematurely right before I took this job. Will be going off to college in the next 5 years. Yeah. Which is bananas. And so a lot of my attention and focus is on him and his younger sister. as we navigate these next 5 years.
Yeah.
I don't know. I do
Well,
know that I love what I'm teaching now, and I love what I do.
so I want to go back to, I had this thought about 10 minutes ago, but I didn't share it. You mentioned education, you mentioned learning better by doing. And I have a great example of that in the space law world, which is that my visit to UN Copios was on the subject of nuclear power in space. And the technical and regulatory and political challenge of producing enough nuclear material in the United States for civil space uses, and the way in which the different U.S. agencies that both use the material and regulate it all have to work together to use military facilities, defense facilities, to make civil radioactive material. And so, as I prepared for that UN Copios meeting and did some other mission-focused work with JPL, I had that learning legal stuff by doing experience in a remarkably interesting and obviously very complicated environment of nuclear material. So I compare that to reading up in case law, and I certainly agree with you that
It's no
doing
comparison.
works a lot better. Works
Right.
so
I'm a firm believer.
yeah.
My approach to experiential education is one part hands-on, doing the legal work, serving
Mm,
clients, noting that client can mean a lot of different things. Your client can be the
sure.
government, your client can
Yeah.
be, whoever, or a traditional client as we think of them. And then the other part is observational work, right? I want
Mm.
students in the courtroom. I want students in
Uh,
client meetings. I want them watching lawyers in the practice of law.
well,
And
that must make the externship leadership really rewarding for you.
yes, I love it. It's a really good gig. It really is. I really
Yeah.
like what I do. I like watching students grow through it, figuring out
Mm,
what they like and what they don't like. Even more
sure.
importantly, sometimes they thought that's what they wanted, and then they did it, and we're like, oh no.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's really important growth, right?
Sure.
And it's also an opportunity to teach students professional skills and reflective skills that my hope serve them the rest of their careers and their lives as they think about who they want to be as a professional in a service industry like the law.
Mm,
This is maybe a little bit, I don't know, I don't want to say even naive or too optimistic, but I do
mm,
feel like as lawyers, we have the keys to a gate-kept system, right? And
mm.
we can access the legal system in a way that the general population can't. For right or for wrong, we have those
Yeah.
skills. And so whether we want to be or not, we are leaders in our
Sure.
communities. And not everyone needs to lead in the same way, and not everybody will lead in the same way, but we have an obligation. And that's really important to me and has always been really important to me in my volunteer work and in my life and thinking about
Yeah.
I serve my country, my clients, my people, and I want to make sure that our students think those things through while they're still students and working towards that
Yeah.
licensure, and how they want to lead and serve with this obligation that we are handed with our licenses.
Well, I can't think of a better theme to end on than that of leadership and responsibility. So I think with that, we're going to call today's episode. I really appreciate your time. Always enjoy chatting with you. I think we could have gone on for several more hours. So thank you very much, and go Big Red.
Right. Yes. Thank you so much. I had a great time.
Take care. And thanks for everyone else for listening, and we'll see you on the next one.